The first HOA violation notice arrived just 30 days after I moved into what I thought would be my peaceful retirement home. It wasn't a warning about my lawn or my mailbox. It was a $50 daily fine for having my boat docked at their lakeshore. That small piece of paper would ignite a battle I never expected, but one that would ultimately expose the truth about property ownership they never saw coming. I'm Robert Henderson, a 20-year Navy veteran who served our country before retiring to what I hoped would be quiet suburban life. After decades of moving from base to base, I'd saved enough to purchase a beautiful property overlooking Crystal Lake in a gated community called The Shores. The realtor had emphasized the peaceful atmosphere, the friendly neighbors, and of course, the private lake access. What she conveniently forgot to mention was the power-hungry HOA president, who seemed to have made it his personal mission to control every aspect of our lives. "Mr. Henderson," President Harold Whitmore said, adjusting his perfectly pressed polo shirt during our first encounter, "that boat of yours violates Section 4.7 of our community bylaws." I looked at my modest 22-foot fishing boat, inherited from my late father. "I'm sorry, Harold. I was told lake access came with the property." "It does," he replied with a condescending smile, "but only for non-motorized watercraft. Your boat has an engine, and according to our regulations, it must be stored in the community marina, for a monthly fee, of course." The fines started small, $50 a day, but quickly escalated when I refused to move the boat or pay the fees. Within 2 weeks, I owed nearly $1,000. What followed was a series of increasingly hostile encounters with the HOA board. "This is your final warning, Robert," Whitmore told me during our monthly meeting, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Either move that boat or we'll place a lien on your property." "I've served this country for 2 decades, I responded, keeping my voice steady. "I'm not intimidated by bureaucratic bullies." The room fell silent. Board members exchanged uncomfortable glances. Whitmore's face reddened. "That's disrespectful, Henderson. The fine is now $100 daily until compliance. If this reminds you of your HOA, drop a comment about your experience. I'd love to hear I'm not alone in this battle." The conflict escalated over the next month. Notices were taped to my door. My garbage cans were mysteriously not collected. On pickup days, one morning I found someone had placed a bright orange sticker on my boat that read "Violation." I decided to fight back legally, hiring a local attorney to review the HOA bylaws and my property deed. What we discovered in that initial review was surprising. My property deed included a peculiar clause about riparian rights that seemed unusual for a standard lakeside home. "Robert," my attorney said, leaning forward in his office chair, "this deed references something called the Carlson-Ellsworth Agreement from 1978. Have you ever heard of it?" I shook my head. "No. Should I have?" "Maybe not," he replied thoughtfully. "But it's worth investigating. This could change everything. What do you think happened next?" As I dug deeper into the history of Crystal Lake, I uncovered something that would turn this entire situation on its head. The first twist came during a visit to the county records office. I was searching for any information about the Carlson-Ellsworth Agreement when an elderly clerk named Margaret recognized the names. "Oh, the Ellsworth family," she exclaimed. "They owned most of this land before the development was built. Old man Ellsworth was quite particular about who could access his lake." "His lake?" I asked, confused. "I thought the lake was community property." Margaret lowered her voice conspiratorially. "That's what the developers told everyone when they built the shores. But according to county records from before 1985, Crystal Lake was privately owned by the Ellsworth family." My heart raced as I realized what this might mean. "Is there any way to find out who owns it now?" She smiled knowingly. "The original deed was transferred in 1992 after the patriarch passed away. Let me pull those records for you. This is exactly what HOAs don't want you to know. how property rights and ownership history can completely change the power dynamic in these communities. 3 days later, I received a call that would change everything. The record showed that Crystal Lake and its shoreline had been sold to a trust in 1992, a trust established by my grandfather, of all people, and passed down to me upon his death 5 years ago. I had inherited the lake without even realizing it. "Are you telling me that I legally own Crystal Lake?" I asked my attorney, disbelief evident in my voice. "Not just the lake," he clarified, "but according to these documents, you own the shoreline up to the high water mark of every property in the shore's development." The implications were staggering. The HOA had been fining me for docking my boat on property I actually owned. They had no legal standing whatsoever. The turning point came during the next HOA meeting, which I attended with my attorney and a folder containing the original court deeds establishing my ownership. "Mr. Henderson," Whitmore began, his usual smug expression firmly in place, "we've tallied your fines. You now owe the association $7,500. We're prepared to move forward with the lien process unless payment is made in full by Friday." I stood slowly, letting the silence build in the room. "Harold, before we discuss money I owe you, perhaps we should discuss money you owe me." Whitmore laughed. "Is that some kind of joke?" "Not at all," I replied, opening the folder. "You see, I recently discovered some interesting information about Crystal Lake, specifically who actually owns it." I passed copies of the deeds around the table. As the board members read them, their expressions shifted from confusion to shock to horror. "This can't be right," Whitmore stammered, his face pale. "These must be forgeries." "They're not," my attorney interjected. "We've verified them with the county. Mr. Henderson is the legal owner of Crystal Lake and all shoreline properties up to the high water mark." The climax of this confrontation was something I'll never forget. Whitmore stood, knocking his chair over in his haste. "You can't prove this. We've been managing this lake for 30 years. "Actually," I said calmly, "the law is quite clear on riparian rights, and according to these documents, every fine you've levied against me for docking my boat was illegal. In fact, I could countersue for harassment and illegal assessment of fees." The room erupted into chaos. Board members shouted at each other. Some demanded Whitmore's resignation. Others simply stared in disbelief at the documents in front of them. Within a week, news of my ownership had spread throughout the community. Residents who had been subjected to similar harassment by the HOA began coming forward with their own stories. What started as my personal battle had exposed a pattern of abuse and overreach by the HOA board. The final showdown came at an emergency community meeting, attended by nearly every homeowner in the shores. Whitmore and his board attempted to defend their actions, but the evidence against them was overwhelming. "For years," I addressed the assembled residents, "this HOA has operated under the assumption that they controlled access to Crystal Lake. They've fined residents, placed liens on properties, and created rules based on this false premise. The truth is that they never had the legal authority to do any of it. The vote to dissolve the HOA was nearly unanimous. Whitmore and his board members resigned in disgrace, facing potential legal action from multiple residents. In the weeks that followed, life at the shores transformed. Without the oppressive HOA regulations, neighbors began talking to each other again. Community events were organized by residents rather than imposed by the board. And yes, my boat remained exactly where it belonged, docked at my private shoreline. If you've ever felt powerless against your HOA, remember that knowledge is your greatest weapon. Property rights matter, and sometimes the truth really does set you free. As I sit on my deck watching the sunset over Crystal Lake, I reflect on this unexpected battle in my retirement years. After serving my country, I never imagined I'd be fighting for my rights in my own neighborhood. But there's a profound satisfaction in knowing that justice prevailed, not just for me, but for all the residents of the shores who had been bullied and intimidated for too long. The lake that was once a source of conflict has become a symbol of community and freedom. And my boat? It stays exactly where it belongs, a reminder that sometimes the underdog does win, and that the truth, once revealed, cannot be sunk.